Well, good morning. My name is Matthew Dukes. I'm with the National Weather Service in Sioux Falls, and I welcome you to our version of the 2022-2023 Winter Weather Awareness class. This class is right on target with a lot of the winter weather here we've been experiencing over the past 24 hours. Hopefully we can give you some ideas as far as how to stay aware and how to stay safe over the upcoming winter season, since we do have quite a bit of a season left to go. We'll do some introductory stuff here, but if you do have questions throughout today's show, there is a questions dialog box. Feel free to enter them in. If time allows, we'll try to answer some of those questions at the very end of today's talk, since we do have quite a bit to go over here today. So without further ado, let's get today's show going. So why are we doing this kind of talk today? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about who we are here at the National Weather Service and why we're doing it. We're going to take a little bit of a historical look at winters of past and ways we can stay aware for the future season ahead. We're going to talk about safety, winter safety, both staying aware of winter weather, what to do ahead of a winter storm, and what to do if you're caught out into the elements during the winter season. We're going to go over something very important, how to measure and report winter precipitation, something that a lot of us have may find useful here today. And we're going to wrap up and I'll show you some resources that we have available for all of you out there moving forward throughout this winter season. First, a little bit about myself. My name is Matthew Dukes. I'm a lead meteorologist here at the National Weather Service office in Sioux Falls. I've worked here since 2014 and I've been in the National Weather Service since 2005. So quite a few years. I started my career out in National Weather Service, Kansas City. So a little bit warmer than what we've experienced here in Sioux Falls. But I was born and raised in the state of Wisconsin, so I'm very familiar with winter weather and winter weather hazards. Now, there are going to be some documents that will be available and some more resources. If you want to go to this website here linked on the slide, or else you can use your phone to scan the QR code. Otherwise, I'll show you this link again at the end of the presentation that you can view. So a little bit about the National Weather Service. We're a dedicated team of 25 people here between meteorologists, administrative staff, management staff, and technological staff that help support the radar and all of our observing equipment. We are here 24/7, 365. So even on those snowy winter holidays, we're still here doing the forecast and issuing watches and warnings. Our office is located at the National Weather Service office here at the Sioux Falls Airport. If you've ever been in Sioux Falls and you've driven by and seen that big white ball that's right along Minnesota Avenue, that is where our office is located at the airport. What are some of the things we do? Well, we do a public 7-day forecast. So if you go to our website, www.weather.gov/Sioux Falls, you can get our local forecast for not only the Sioux Falls area, but for much of the 44 county area surrounding the city of Sioux Falls. We do special services for hydrology, fire weather, aviation forecasts. So if you fly out of the Sioux Falls or Sioux City or Huron airports, we do specialized aviation forecasts for those cities. We also provide decision support services and emergency service support for our local partners in the emergency management community, as well as many of the local cities and sheriff's offices across the area. So why do we think winter safety is so important? Well, according to the Department of Transportation, did you know that almost 70% of the US population lives in an area that can see snowfall? 24% of weather-related crashes are related to winter conditions. So a considerable amount of those crashes are related to conditions, such as what we're seeing today. State and local governments spend almost $2.3 billion a year on winter weather operations. So weather has a huge financial stake. And last but not least, did you know that almost 1,300 people are killed every year and over almost 120,000 people are injured due to winter weather crashes? So winter weather safety is an extremely important thing. We think about spotter training classes only for severe weather season, as far as thunderstorms. But it's actually winter weather and winter weather safety can hold a very important role in how we stay safe and prepared for the season ahead. So to do that, we kind of need to know what winter's like in this part of the country. Well, did you know that on average, we average between 40 and even 55 inches of snow across much of the northern US during a typical winter season. You can see on the map on the slide here that you're looking at some of the enhanced areas up across the UP of Michigan, where you have lake effect snow, where you can have over 100 inches of snow. But generally in the tri-state area and across the Dakotas, Minnesota, Iowa, and Nebraska, we see anywhere between 35 and 45 inches of snow. This year so far, we've had a few minor winter storms. The storm of the past 24 hours was our most significant, with almost 8 to 9 inches of snow across Sioux Falls. This brings us, believe it or not, to about the normal amount of snowfall we have for this time of the year. And speaking of that snowfall, we need to know how often it snows. Well, believe it or not, we can actually see snowfall in the area, and this is for the Sioux Falls forecast area, as early as late September or early October. The chart here may look a little complex, but basically this is the frequency, or the amount of frequency in an average time span where we've had greater than an inch of snowfall. And as you can see, in October, those numbers are generally fairly low. We don't typically get many snowstorms or many impactful snowstorms in October, but those percentages start to increase as you go through the fall, and we start to get kind of an initial maximum right around early to middle December. Why is that? Well, it's because we start seeing those clashes of warm and cold air that we see during the fall and winter transition seasons. Now, as we get into January, which is typically our coldest time of the year, we may at times see a little bit of a lull in the frequency of bigger snowstorms. And that's because, well, we're in that deep heart of winter. We don't see quite as many of the big air mass clashes. Unfortunately, if you've lived here long enough, or maybe you're new to the area, you may not realize this, our highest peak of snowstorm frequency or snow frequency happens from about mid-February all the way through early March. And this is again due to those changes in seasons, that transition from winter back towards spring, when we start to see more warmer air come northward and have those interactions. Unfortunately though, if you look at the chart, you see that we have frequencies of snow all the way to late April and early May. So what does this mean? It means that it can be a long winter. Once winter sets in here, we have a risk for basically 6 months of our year. Let's talk about winter's cold. Well, it hasn't been too cold yet this winter season because we haven't had a ton of snowfall. But did you know on average, almost 2 to 3 weeks of our winter season has a wind chill of at least -20? That's not even at the extremely critical levels. That's just getting really cold. So almost 2 to 3 weeks of a wind chill at a beginning to be at a dangerous level. Those actual number of days when we have a high temperature below freezing is almost 50 to 60 days across most of the area. So if you're new to the tri-state area, get prepared. Our winter season is usually snowy, and our winter season is usually pretty cold on average. So where do we get our air from? We talk about snowstorms and Arctic outbreaks and cold air and warm air. Well, we typically deal with a few different air masses. The most common one for the winter season is something called the continental polar air mass, which resides across southern Canada into central Canada. These air masses bring our typical winter shots of cold air, nothing too extreme, but those reminders that we are into the winter season. The very cold air masses are called continental Arctic air masses. These cold air masses unlock during the winter on average of maybe 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 times. You may have heard something called the polar vortex. Polar vortex can be one of these circulations or global patterns that can drop down and bring this Arctic air southward. And it's these extreme cold Arctic air masses that bring our most dangerous cold temperatures. Now, when it comes to winter snowfall, where do we get the snowfall or the moisture for snowfall? Well, these come from usually 2 different air masses, the maritime tropical, which comes out of the Gulf of Mexico, and the maritime polar, which comes out of the eastern Pacific. If we are able to tap into either of these air masses, we usually have an increased potential for wintry precipitation into the area. But where do our storms come from? We talk about cold air masses and warm air masses. What storm patterns bring these snowstorms? Well, we have 3 dominant patterns across the central United States. A clipper pattern, which is usually indicating a storm is coming from the northwest. So from Alberta or Saskatchewan or Manitoba. These are typically fast-moving systems. The snows don't last very long. We don't typically get extremely heavy snow with these systems because they can't tap into a lot of the really moist and deep moisture that comes from the Gulf of Mexico. These are probably our most common snowstorms. The other one would be called a panhandle hook or a Colorado low. These snowstorms usually originate from the west or the eastern Pacific, and then they dig down into the southwestern United States, cross Colorado, and then sweep up into the northern US. These are less common, but what happens with these systems is they can tap into more moisture. They can tap into more jet stream energy. So they become larger and they become more encapsulating of a larger area. You have a much better opportunity to pull in more moisture, pull in more wind. You can get mixed precipitation when these come through. The storm system we're going to be dealing with next week across the area will have a much better chance of digging into the southwest and moving up into the area. That's why we're so concerned about the potential for precipitation across most of the northern US next week. The final system is called a progressive zonal flow pattern. This is a little bit more similar to the storm system we had last night. They're usually very fast moving. They originate from the eastern Pacific, cross in almost a due west to due east fashion across the area. They can deepen as they move through, but they're also able to tap into a little bit of that increased moisture flow, resulting in, like we saw last night, some mixed precipitation. They can also bring in that warmer air and that precipitation, or that increased moisture, which can lead to some instability. In the case across the area last night, we had thunder snow, which we'll talk about in just a second. But that progressive zonal flow pattern can actually produce some moderate snowfall because of that increased moisture. So what falls from the sky? We've talked about snowfall. We think of winter, we think of snow. Well, it's not the only precipitation type we can get. We can get sleet, we can get freezing rain, or we can get just purely rain. And what causes this? Well, it's due to the temperatures above the ground. The more warm air above the ground we have, the more likelihood you're going to have a mixed precipitation event. In the cases of last night, we had a little bit of warmer air. So we had some sleet when the precipitation first arrived. In some areas, we actually had freezing rain or maybe even some freezing drizzle. And when that happens, that just means that we have enough of the air above the ground that's warm enough to melt that falling snow. And unfortunately, we had a ground temperature last night that was below freezing. So all that liquid could fall and could turn into ice when it met a colder surface. Now, in some cases, the warmer air above the ground is so strong that it pulls right down to the surface. The temperature rises to 33 or 34, and all that snow just turns into pure rain. How do we sample all these things? How do we study these as meteorologists? We look at an atmospheric sounding, and that's what the image is on the far right-hand side of your screen. This is an atmospheric sounding that shows us a freezing rain sounding. So if you can imagine a little bit, snow falls from above, way above the ground. It hits that little nose of warmer air that's highlighted in red. Now that snow is going to melt into a liquid. And as it continues to fall to the ground, it reaches a much colder air mass again. And that colder air mass sitting at the ground may kind of refreeze that liquid into sleet, or it could refreeze it into freezing rain, depending on the temperature at the ground. So not all the snow is the same, though. You've probably heard of something called the snow liquid ratio, or maybe more or less you've heard about snow being, leaf blower snow, light and fluffy and blows around at a whim. Maybe you've learned of snow that's a bit like last night, very wet, very heavy, very like concrete. Well, this is all determined by something called the snow liquid ratio. And what this is, it's an average, meaning that for every inch of liquid that we get falling out of the sky, it equivalates to so much snow. So in the Sioux Falls area and much of the surrounding area, our typical snow liquid ratio is around 13:1. So that means for every inch of liquid that we receive during a winter event, we would get 13 inches of snow. In last night's case, though, the snow liquid ratio was fairly low because it was warm, and the temperature above the ground was fairly warm at times. So our snow liquid ratio last night was more like a 7 to maybe a 10:1 ratio. So very wet and very heavy wet snow fell across much of the area. We also get something called thunder snow. And for a meteorologist, this is one of the most exciting things that can happen during the winter season. Well, much like during the spring and summer season, thunder snow develops when a very warm and unstable air mass moves northward atop of a very cold air mass at the ground. So last night we had colder air moving in from the north, and we had extremely warm air and unstable air moving in from the south. So those two air masses move on top of each other, and you kind of get a turbulence or a turning of the atmosphere in the lower levels. This turbulence or this rising forced up motion in the atmosphere creates a charge between all those little ice crystals and particles in the clouds. And when that charge builds up enough, you'll get it in the form of lightning. Why is snow important? Why is lightning very important during the winter season? Well, any presence of lightning means the atmosphere is very unstable. It means that you've got a lot of energy that's going to be released into that snow. And what's going to happen is that increases your snowfall rates. So what we saw last night in portions of the area, snowfall rates in excess of 2 to even 4 inches per hour were common. And a snowfall forecast of 4 to 6 inches can turn into one that's 6 to 8 or 6 to 10 inches very quickly. Thunder snow can be very difficult to forecast. It doesn't happen all that frequently, maybe once a season if we're fortunate in this area. On average, though, it's usually once every couple of years that we'll see thunder snow. So what can drive our winter patterns going into the winter season? Well, if you've ever heard about climate, you might have heard about something called the ENSO cycle, or the El Nino Southern Oscillation. All these basically is a global weather pattern that's formed by something called the water temperatures along the equatorial Pacific. If the water temperature is colder than normal, we typically favor a La Nina season. If it's warmer than normal, we favor an El Nino season. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty about what these things are and what happens because of them, but basically the influence of the temperatures in the equatorial Pacific do something to shift our jet stream, whether that jet stream is over the northern Pacific up near Alaska, or it's a little bit further south. And this has a direct impact on our temperature and precipitation patterns for the winter season ahead. So if you haven't heard, this year is yet another La Nina year. This is actually our third La Nina year in a row, which is extremely unique. It's only happened a few times on our recorded history that we've had 3 La Nina years in a row. But what does that mean to us? Well, every La Nina year can be a little bit different. These are the maps that I'm showing here is kind of the typical impacts of a La Nina, meaning that when the jet stream shifts further north during La Nina, this usually opens up the northern US to more colder air coming out of Canada throughout the winter. It can shift our weather patterns or push the highest probability of more precipitation down into the Ohio River valleys and into further south and east of the area. But like I said, every year can be different. There are other global factors or other global circulations that can impact our weather, such as Arctic oscillations, the North Atlantic Oscillation, the Pacific North American Oscillation, and the Antarctic Oscillation. These are just 4 examples of other smaller scale connections and circulations in the atmosphere that can impact our winter throughout the season. So what does that mean for our winter? Well, this is the latest outlook issued mid-November for December, January, and February for the heart of the winter season. This doesn't encapsulate the entire winter season, but this is our typical winter season. And so for right now, we're seeing trends, at least with La Nina and other circulations, that would favor a greater potential for below normal temperatures across much of the northern United States. As far as precipitation goes, it's a little bit more uncertain. This is the 3rd La Nina year in a row. Does that mean every year is going to be like the past 2 years where it's been drier than normal? Not necessarily. We do see some of the same signals, though, being brought in from a typical La Nina year. Above normal precipitation favored in portions of the Great Lakes and Ohio River Valley. And again, above normal precipitation in the Rockies, the Northern Rockies, and into the Pacific Northwest. It's a little bit more uncertain when you're closer to home, which is why we're saying right now it's equal chances. There's no No favor above normal or below normal. We're likely going to be somewhere in that normal terrain. So what does normal mean when it comes to winter in this portions of the area? Winter storm watches, which are, we'll talk a little bit more about the definitions in a minute here, but we have about 6 winter storm watches every year across the area. We have 3 blizzard warnings, which are the highest end winter storm product that we can issue. So about 3 per year. Winter storm warnings, when we're talking about life-threatening winter storm conditions, heavy snow, strong winds, we get about 6 of those a year. Winter weather advisories for more nuisance precipitation, stuff that's going to cause you some travel difficulties, but may not completely shut everything down, about 20 a year. So we do see quite a bit of winter weather impacts when it comes to wintry precipitation. Ice storm warnings. Ice storm warnings are our highest level product when it comes to freezing rain or icing. Typically, though, we don't see more than about 1 a year. So that's a less common winter storm headline. How about winter's cold? Well, we already looked at an image that says we get about 2 to 3 weeks or more with wind chills of -20 for at least an hour. But wind chill advisories, when we start really getting concerned about wind chill values, these happen when the wind chill drops below 25 below, and it can go all the way to 35 below. Wind chill advisories mean that frostbite can occur in 15 to as many as 30 minutes to exposed skin. They're fairly common. We get about 10 per year. Remember, we get almost 2 to 3 weeks of cold. We just get about 10 days per year when the cold becomes even more dangerous. Wind chill warnings are the most extreme cold headline product. When you start seeing wind chills of 35 below or colder, it means that frostbite can set in 10 minutes or less to any exposed skin. We see these on average with these big Arctic air intrusions that happen. We see this about 1 to maybe 2 times per year on average. So we've talked a little bit about what to expect during the winter season. Let's talk about how do we stay aware before, during, and then after the winter storm. Well, one of the #1 resources that I'll point you to is our webpage, www.weather.gov/Sioux Falls. This will give you a lot of resources. Now I've screen captured the image here from yesterday ahead of the winter storm that moved through last night, just to give you a good example of what you can expect. A couple numbered highlights here. #1 here is a place where you can put in your zip code for your current forecast, or you can see the current observations for your local area. #2 and #3 are a little bit go hand in hand together. It will show you if there's any headlines. And by headlines, I mean those winter storm products, watches, warnings, advisories, hazardous weather outlooks. And that little map that you see there, if you want your local forecast, you can click in your area on that map, and it'll bring up a 7-day forecast with details for your location. Now, #4 is another very important one because it points to our winter weather resources page. We'll talk in the next slide about our winter weather resources page, but this page will give you more details about winter weather that's on the way. #5, our weather story tab in the bottom left hand of the page. These are graphics. The Weather Service offices across the country, almost every office now creates summary graphics that may show winter weather threats. They may show a 5 or 7-day forecast. They may show any impact to the weather that's going to happen over the next few days. They're a good one-stop shop if you just want a good graphical overview of what the current concerns are, the bullets or the headlines that you would want to be aware of, and things you should do. #6 here is the local radar. Many of us may use weather apps for our radar. They may use local TV, but the National Weather Service has their own radar page that you can view as well. Finally, #7, if you're a planner, organizer, or you're just an interested member of the public who wants to know more about the weather, #7 is a decision support packet that will begin issuing usually ahead of more larger scale events that are expected to impact a larger portion of the area. Not going to give you an example of these, but usually it's a PDF that will give you a multi-page overview of the current hazards, the conditions, and the forecast concerns that we have moving forward. Now, the National Weather Service doesn't have an app, But we do have a mobile website that's really easy to bookmark to your phone as an icon. If you go in your web browser, your internet browser on your mobile phone and put in mobile.weather.gov, it'll bring up a place where you can enter in your zip code. If you're familiar with how Android or iPhones work or Apple devices work, you can go to the sharing button at the bottom of your screen, and then normally a phone will have an option to add to your home screen. By doing this, it'll create a little icon on your home screen to where you can have a shortcut to your detailed forecast from the National Weather Service on your phone. So speaking of that winter weather resources page that I mentioned just a little bit ago, this is a great page if you're looking for winter weather resources and how to stay aware. If you click on that page, it's always linked at the top of our web page under the news headlines. Click on that link, you're going to get an overview of our hazards or products that are in effect. You're going to be able to see expected snowfall and ice accumulations. You're going to be able to access our recent snow reports, local radar, and something called the Winter Storm Severity Index, which I'll talk to in just a minute or two. You'll get access to our social media feeds. Highly recommend you following those. We're on both Twitter and Facebook. But you also see 6-hour breakouts of winds, wind gusts, wind chill, snowfall amounts. And last but not least, if you're looking for some of the larger cities in our forecast area, you'll be able to see an hour-by-hour breakdown of what the weather conditions are going to be like in those cities. So it might help you plan if you're an event planner. You know, if you work for an organization that needs to know when the chances of precipitation or snow begin to rise, I really encourage you to check out this page. Now, if you're more of a power user, so to speak, if you go back to this winter weather resources page, look for something called the probabilistic snowfall page. Now, this is for maybe more of the advanced users, but a lot of people find this very useful. A lot of our forecasts have transitioned over the years to using multi-model blends and using what we call probabilistic data, where we can put all of this data into a forecast and then calculate the odds or the probabilities of reaching thresholds. That may be an inch of snowfall, 2 inches of snowfall, 6 inches of snowfall. But it gives you a good overview if you're a planner about what I should be concerned about. Here are just a few different examples showing the chances of 2 inches of snowfall, some snowfall ranges, as well as some of the other probabilistic information that you might see. You'll be seeing a lot of this information on our social media feeds. We're experimenting with many different ways of graphically producing this kind of information. So we're always welcome to feedback, and we're always welcome to improving the information that you're seeing. That Winter Storm Severity Index is another really good tool that's been developed over the last 5 or 6 years. The Winter Storm Severity Index is basically a tool that takes a look at the National Weather Service forecast, but puts it into context as far as the type of snow that's falling, how wet or how dry the snow is. Is there going to be blowing snow or flash freeze conditions? And it takes that Weather Service forecast and it also incorporates things like, what's your climatology? Is this a unusual kind of event? Is this a normal kind of event for the time of the year? It looks at your ground cover. So in areas that have more trees or areas that have more open space, it may affect what the potential for blowing snow is, for an example. In a lot of areas, this allows us to give an overall impact to what the winter storm could bring to the area. And recently, at least in this last 6 months, we've changed some of these impact levels. So we go from anywhere from where we're just expecting some winter weather that isn't going to have much of an impact to moderate impacts to where your everyday life is going to be impacted and travel may be extremely difficult, or major and even extreme impacts to where we can begin to say that the forecast that we're putting out there is suggesting that travel is going to be impossible. Conditions are going to be very difficult to everyday life. It's more sophisticated than just your typical snowfall forecast, and it gives you a good idea as far as what to expect. So what are some common terms you may hear during the winter weather season? Well, if you're checking our webpage, you might hear something called the Hazardous Weather Outlook. Now, this is a generalized outlook that we put together for the 7-day forecast, and it highlights basically where our concerns, where we're looking at as meteorologists over the next 7 days. It might be more detail if the storm is within the next day or two. We might be putting in snow amounts and more concerns. But if the storm is 5 or 6 or 7 days out and we're not quite ready to say what the snowfall totals are going to be, or what if there's a severe weather, greater risk of severe weather, that we just aren't able to pinpoint those details, we'll begin mentioning it into the hazardous weather outlook. That'll give you an overview. You kind of raise those initial flags in the back of your mind that we need to be on the ready, need to be becoming prepared for the potential for some impactful weather. Watch advisories and warnings are the other major terms you're going to hear. Winter storm watches are issued usually a few days ahead of a major winter storm. They're your trigger to become ready. It's time to prepare for extremely hazardous weather conditions that could become life-threatening. Advisories. What are advisories? This is kind of your next tier. We want you to use caution when you're in an advisory. They may not stop travel. They may not completely cripple your life or cause infrastructure issues. Most times it's minor to maybe some moderate inconveniences to travel, maybe some school outages, airport delays, but they're not the highest end winter storm product. Those are winter storm warnings, blizzard warnings. These are products, when you hear these issued, take action. There's usually a life-threatening winter storm or maybe the potential for crippling winter storm conditions that are expected into the area. So some of these thresholds for headlines. Not going to talk about everything here, but I've kind of broken these cold season weather headlines into categories, from warnings to advisories. Winter storm warnings are issued typically when we see 6 inches of snow within 12 hours or 8 inches of snow within 24 hours. They can be issued a combination of maybe wind-driven snow. Maybe we're expecting a lot of wind, a lot of blowing snow. Maybe there's sleet, freezing rain also mixed in there. This can also push some of those thresholds a little bit higher to where we're expecting crippling conditions across an area. Blizzard warnings. We hear a lot during the winter season about the visibility being extremely bad, but it was only bad for a little bit of time. Well, a blizzard warning is our highest end winter storm product, but there's some criteria here. We can have any amount of snow in a blizzard warning, but you have to have gusts at least 35 miles an hour and visibilities at least less than a quarter mile for 3 or more hours. So you might think that if the snow is really bad, the visibility is really bad for half an hour, that should be a blizzard. Well, not technically. We need to have a longer duration that will have that. But again, no snowfall amount is associated with that. So we can have blizzard warnings with 1 inch or 2 of snow, and we can have blizzard warnings with no snow. But if there's a lot of snow on the ground and a lot of wind that's causing blowing snow, that can lead to a blizzard warning as well. Ice storm warnings issued for ice accumulations greater than a quarter of an inch. Wind chill warnings, again, very rare, but they're issued when the wind chill drops below 35 below. Winter weather advisories, again, we kind of talked about this. These are your nuisance winter weather events. They can be typically issued for 2 inches or more of snow. Sometimes early in the season when we're not ready for the snow, maybe it's one of the first snows of the year, you might see that criteria flexible a little bit. It can also be issued for a combination of snow, sleet, and freezing rain that can cause an impact to travel or just general hazards across the area. Wind chill advisories, again, pretty common. As we talked earlier, about 10 times a year we see these, and that's when we start to see those concerns for frostbite within 15 to 30 minutes. One other product we do issue, not very frequently here in the Sioux Falls forecast area, but other parts of the country do issue them more frequently, is a snow squall warning. These are usually what we consider short fuse products. What do I mean by short fuse products? Well, unlike a winter storm warning or winter weather advisory, those are usually issued for hours and hours upon time. Short fuse products are issued for shorter amount of time, usually 30 to maybe 60 minutes, much like a severe thunderstorm warning or a tornado warning. They're not issued during winter storms or during blizzard warnings, and usually pretty unlikely during advisories because we're already expecting some of those impacts to happen. Snow squall warnings are issued when we're expecting a fairly sudden onset of severe winter weather conditions where your visibility drops to near zero, but it may only last for 20 or 30 minutes. A lot of times we'll have some pretty strong winds when these happen as well. Now, as of right now, these snow squall warnings will sound on your phone, much like a tornado will. You'll get something called a WEA alert, wireless emergency alert on your phone. Later this winter season, we're going to be going through some changes, which will actually create a bit of a tiered system. So much like severe thunderstorms, where severe thunderstorm warnings aren't usually toned alerted on your phone, only the higher end severe thunderstorm warnings are toned. Snow squall warnings will become very similar to where a typical snow squall warning won't be, but the higher end ones where we have confirmed extreme impacts will likely be sounded on your phones sometime later this winter. But again, these are fairly rare products for this portion of the area. The number one key here when we want to stay alert and stay aware of weather is to know your sources and use reliable sources. So many times with the spread of social media nowadays, we see a lot of unverified and maybe not so trustworthy sources out there. So we want you to do these things. Verify your source. Do you know if they're a distinguished and trustworthy source? Do you know what their background is? Do you know if you can truly trust them? Avoid clickbait. If somebody's out there on social media using buzzwords and extremely dire wording, unless they're a verified source like Weather Service or local media or your local emergency manager or community, be very careful. Avoid rumor control. Beware of those exaggerated forecasts. There's a lot of modelology, we'll call it out there, where somebody will grab an extremely dire looking model, which may be that way for one model run, but may change completely the next model run or the next day. But they'll treat that model, they'll treat that data as if it was the forecast. Be very careful. Watch for outdated graphics. Make sure you're not sharing something on social media that's a day or two old and the forecast has changed. Again, situational awareness is your number one tool. Make sure you're watching the local news if a winter storm is heading our way. Make sure you're checking the Weather Service pages and staying aware of the local forecast. Again, what we want you to do, trusted sources, NOAA, National Weather Service, local media outlets including TVs and radio, national media outlets. There are reliable apps out there, but be aware of where your data is coming from. A lot of newer apps now, the forecast may change quite frequently. Just stay aware, have multiple sources, check multiple sources and verify your information. So how do we stay safe and how do we prepare before, during, and after that winter storm? Well, if you haven't already, you still have time. We have a long winter season ahead. If you're expecting a major winter storm that's going to impact the area, do a few things like this. Make sure you have groceries. That doesn't mean go run out and grab groceries before every chance of snow. But just if you're expecting a major winter storm, maybe there's a watch in effect, maybe you're in a winter storm warning and you have time to prepare, make sure you have food supplies in case you can't travel. Same thing with medications. Make sure your medications are up to date. You don't have to struggle to get those medications if you're unable to get out of your home. If we have a lot of winter snow during the season and it's piling up outside, your furnace vents in some homes are fairly low to the ground. Make sure those aren't blocked. That can be a source of carbon monoxide poisoning within your home. Make sure your shovels and snow blowers are equipped and they're working. A lot of people here today are finding out that maybe their snow blowers weren't quite ready. Maybe they weren't ready for the winter season ahead. Make sure your family is aware of what to do. Make sure you have a communications plan, and we have a way of receiving weather alerts, whether it be on your phone, whether you're getting an email or a text. Make sure you're all aware of your communication plan. Other things you want to gather in your home: salt and shovels, flashlights, extra batteries. Maybe you want to have a battery pack for your cell phones. Non-perishable food, bottles of water in case something were to happen with the power and you lose the ability to get water. Blankets and warm clothing, prescription medicine again. Make sure your cell phones stay charged up ahead of major winter storms or ice storms. Specifically, we have been known to lose power, especially in some of the rural areas. In your vehicle, you want to make sure you do these things. A lot of people haven't, unfortunately. Make sure you have an emergency kit and a safety kit. This isn't just your scraper. It isn't a pair of gloves. It might be jumper cables. It might be sand or salt. It might be an extra set of I'm trying to think of the word here. Floor mats. Floor mats. That's what I was looking for. Work really good in case you get into some areas where you can't get traction for your tires. Throw an extra blanket or two in your trunk. Have some food. Have some water. Carry that battery charger with you, or carry that battery pack with you if you're hitting on the road. First aid kit, obviously. Simple, again, things you want to do. Vehicle maintenance. Make sure your tire pressure is good. Make sure your tires are good. Check your fluids. Test your test your wiper blades. Make sure they're able to clear off the snow. Ahead of those big winter storms, fill your tanks with gas. And again, if you are traveling, doing any traveling, always monitor the forecast. Not 12 hours before, not 3 days before, and then not do it again. Monitor it as it changes. Weather forecasts always change all the way up to the time that they happen. For work and school, make sure you know who your employer uses to notify if there's a winter delay. Same thing goes for schools. If your school has a text sign up or an app or uses a local TV or radio station, make sure you know how you're going to be aware of those things. So once the storm arrives, what should you do? Well, as much as I'd like to say it, the best point of action is to stay put. Why is this? The fewer vehicles on the road means the roads are going to get cleared faster. You lower the potential for accidents. And overall, the traffic moves faster. Now, obviously, we all have jobs. Most of us have jobs if we still work. We still have places to go at times. It's not always easy to stay put. That's why, again, we go to having a plan. Before weather threatens, make sure you have a plan. If you need to get out, do it before the storm arrives. Make sure you have a communications plan with your friends, family, kids, relatives. Monitor that forecast. Make sure you're staying aware of the forecast because those conditions do change. Check those monitoring devices, smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, especially during big storms. Be very careful. Now, we all have to travel in winter weather. Almost everyone does. So what are you going to do? Well, we've already seen that this winter season, we're taking a little bit of time to adjust to snow in this area. We have to drive to the conditions, number one thing. If it's snowy out, if the visibility is bad, if the roads look icy, you're going to have to do these things. Slow down, reduce your speed. You don't have to drive the speed limit when it's snowy and icy. Maintain plenty of distance. We're going to talk about this a little bit in a second, but maintaining that distance allows you to have time to think about stopping and also be able to stop. Turn those headlights on. A lot of our vehicles nowadays have auto daylight sensing headlights. Unfortunately, some of these turn off during the day when it's actually snowing and bright enough. Turn your headlights on if you're going to travel. Reduce distractions as much as you can. Turn the radio down, be aware of what's in your car, that you're not getting distracted. Again, when we talk about stopping, when it comes to winter weather, we need more reaction time. And if you can't see, if the visibility is so poor that you can't see the road or where you're driving, find a way to get off the road. Pull over, maybe the visibility will improve. If you can't find a spot to get off that road, pull as far off as you can get to the side of the road. Turn on your lights, turn on your hazards to try to be seen. Again, don't stop in the middle of the road, whether it's the road, whether it's the interstate. Those accident rates are going to increase if you do some of those things. We talk about stopping distances. In a real life example here, 35 miles an hour you're driving. The problem is in a dry road, you have 4 to 6 car lengths to be able to stop. Usually good driving distances. You don't have to think so much. When the road starts getting wet, those stopping distances increase. When you start getting to packed snow and ice, you can need almost 10 times more stopping distances when it comes to stopping your car. So again, when we go back to driving and leaving space between you and the vehicle in front of you, this is important. You need to think about stopping. not just the stopping. Now, we may think that only accidents occur in heavy snow. That's the only time we're going to be impacted. We had a question the other day. Why are we so concerned about just an inch of snow? That's nothing, we were told. Well, it's the little snow events that cause the most accidents. Our friends down in Iowa, the Iowa DOT, working with the National Weather Service, put together this great graphic. Over the last 2 years, they found that nearly 75% of crashes in Iowa happened with less than 2 inches of snow on the ground. It's because a lot of times we become overconfident. We think it's just a little bit of light snow, we can drive in it, no problem. When we get to the heavier snow amounts, we're expecting slippery conditions. We're expecting the roads to be snow covered and dangerous, and we begin to reduce our speeds. Again, use your safe driving skills, that thinking before you have to brake, to reduce that potential for accidents, especially in lower snow amounts. So what do we do when the storm arrives? What if I'm out on the road and my vehicle is stuck? I can't get out. Well, number one, call for help. If you're in a situation where you're in distress and something else is wrong, indicate that you're in distress. Indicate that you need to get help immediately. Now, that might be to an emergency response. That might be to a family member. We kind of recommend you making 2 phone calls, making sure multiple people know where you are in case it may take you a little while to get out. But be careful to use your phone too much. Don't be sitting there and watching videos or browsing the internet the entire time you're stuck, because you may not know how long it's going to take to get your vehicle out. Conserve that battery energy, or that phone battery energy. Stay in your vehicle. If it's in bad weather and the visibility is poor, don't think, especially if you're in a high traffic area, maybe you're out in a rural area, stuck on the road, try to stay in the vehicle. Your chances of being hit by another vehicle in poor weather conditions increases dramatically. And when you stay in that vehicle, use your materials in there. If you think it's going to be a while, remember you've got that blanket in there. Maybe you've got other things, a coat, to try to create a barrier to the outside. You might need to insulate your windows if you're going to be stuck for a while, because any exposed surface to the elements is going to make sure that temperature drops in your vehicle that much faster. You'll want to start your vehicle every 10 minutes, if possible, to try to keep the temperature up. Are you going to be toasty the entire time if you're stuck in your car? Probably not. But you need to at least keep the vehicle temperature up high enough so that you can avoid things like wind chill or frostbite, or potentially even hypothermia if you're going to be there an extended amount of time. Just be careful though that if you are off the road and stuck, make sure your tailpipe or your exhaust isn't buried in the snow. If your exhaust is stuck in the snow, you could expose yourself to carbon monoxide poisoning if you're running your vehicle, since that exhaust has nowhere to go. It's okay to get out to clear off those areas to make sure that you have fresh air in your vehicle. Now, if it's at nighttime and you're caught, you're going to want to make yourself visible to your rescuers, whether it's roadside assistance, whether it's a family member. Turn on your dome light occasionally to make sure when you're running your vehicle that you can be seen. Be careful not to leave that dome light on all the time, because that could reduce your battery life. Same with your vehicle lights. Again, that's why we want to start our vehicle every so often. Tie a piece of bright clothing, something reflective. One of the things we recommend people having in their vehicles as well is something reflective. Maybe it's a reflective vest, maybe it's a reflective strap that you use if you're a runner, but put that on an antenna, hang that out to your side of your door, something that a light could reflect off of that. And after the snow stops, and you're able to, raise your vehicle hood. A lot of people may be stuck at the side of the road and people drive by, they're not even aware of it. So the odd situation, or the random case when you're in a snowstorm and you end up getting stuck outside. This doesn't happen frequently, but it can happen. If you're able to, and you have no availability to rescue for a while, try to find some sort of shelter. If you need to walk to a house and you're physically able to and capable of doing it, and you can see where you're walking, go to that shelter. If there's no shelter, you want to try to build one. Any protection from snow and wind, especially in a winter storm, is vital. Again, we don't want you leaving your vehicle if you don't have to. because that is a safe shelter. But if you're stuck outside, you're camping or you're somewhere remote, look for anything that you have. Blankets can make a shelter in the snow, branches, trees, even deep snow can serve as an insulator to the wind, especially if you're talking about extreme cold and extreme winds. You can burrow yourself into the snow with blankets or coats to try to get out of that wind that could cause extreme frostbite or hypothermia. If you can build a fire if you're able to. That may be one of those survival skills that not many of us have available to them. If you're able to, use rocks, put rocks around that fire, and then carefully use those rocks to insulate yourself for heat. You can melt snow for water. Be careful about eating snow for moisture, for water, because that can lower your core temperature. Last but not least, it's okay to exercise. If you're trying to stay warm and you're stuck outside, move your arms and your legs, run around a bit, because that helps increase that body core temperature as much as you can, and it keeps that blood flowing to all those extremities like your fingers and your toes. If you're at home and the power goes out, what should you do? Well, the best thing you can do is stay inside. You can't go anywhere a lot of times if the power's out. You don't know how long the power is going to be out for. There have been times in past winters, especially in rural areas, where the power may be out for days. Conserve your heat. If you can, close off unneeded rooms. Close off, if you're staying in the living room, close off the bedrooms that may be using up heat. Try to conserve all that heat in your house. Close blinds and curtains, which can be an exposure point for cold temperatures coming into your house. It's important to eat and drink. Why? Because that maintains your metabolism. It helps keeping your body burning energy. Use those electronic devices sparingly. Again, we'd highly recommend you, if you're going into a winter storm and there's possibilities for power outages, charge up your phones, charge up your devices, make sure they're staying charged all the time. Have those power banks available for you as that extra power source in case the power does go out. If the power goes out, and it's going to be out for an extended amount of time, use layers of clothing. It's okay to dress warmer in your house. It's okay to put on a winter coat in your house if the power is going to be out for a while. Last but not least, don't forget your pets. Keep them warm and dry as much as possible. If you're cold, they're cold. Provide plenty of food and water. If your pet is an outdoor pet or stays outside, make sure their water isn't frozen in the wintertime. Make sure they have plenty of water, just like you. If you're eating and you're drinking, you're keeping your internal metabolism higher. You're helping keeping your energy in your body core higher. When outside, keep them bundled up. Limit those outdoor times during extreme cold temperatures. Make sure if you're walking your dog, all those things, make sure their paws are protected, their ears are protected. If you have livestock, maybe more difficult. Livestock, make sure they have food. Make sure they have a water source. A lot of times animals will gather together, group together for warmth, but try to find them some sort of shelter if there's any shelter available. What do we do after the storm? Say it's time you want to venture out. Well, number one thing, know before you go. Monitor your road conditions, but give time for those roads to be cleaned. It isn't an instant process. Many cities, it may take hours to even days to clear out after a major winter storm. Give those plows plenty of space. Don't crowd the plow. They're trying to do their job to clean the roads for you. What you can do is help them out by giving them all the space. Safe Travel USA is a good resource if you're looking for road conditions before you head out, or dialing 511. You can get some of the local road conditions in your area. When it comes to your local snowfall around your house, be careful on shoveling. The snow that fell across the area is extremely wet and extremely heavy. Push it. Don't lift it today. If you have medical conditions and you're not able to do it, this probably isn't the snow for you to move. You may have to find help. And if you have to do it in chunks. Don't think you can do it all at once. Wear good boots, gloves, and hats. Make sure that you're protecting all those extremities from frostbite. Take frequent breaks. Stay hydrated. Don't think that you can't have anything to drink when you're out there, because you're going to be expelling heat, body energy, sweating. You're going to need to stay hydrated. And along that line, stay warm and dry. Take an occasional break. Allow yourself to warm back up. Be wary of cold exposure. We've talked a little bit about exposure to the elements. Frostbite, extremely common during the winter season because, well, a lot of times we're not wearing adequate things. We're not wearing gloves. We're not wearing hats. We're not protecting things like nose, ears, toes, cheeks, your chin, or even your fingers. Frostbite's a type of injury that can be caused by cold exposure. As we talked before, once you get to about minus 20 degrees, those risks increase. When you get to minus 25 to 35, 15 to 30 minutes is all it takes for frostbite to expose skin. Watch out for the signs. White, grayish skin, maybe your fingers start to tingle, maybe there's some pain or burning sensation. Your skin may feel unusually firm or waxy. Maybe you've lost touch with your skin. You try to pinch your fingers and you can't feel anything. That leads to that numbness factor. Maybe your hands or your toes are getting stiff or unable to move. What you want to do, seek medical attention if possible. If you don't feel you need medical attention, come into a warm room, but don't put hot water on those layers of skin. Slowly warm up that skin. Use lukewarm water to start. Gradually use warmer water as the skin starts to feel better. Now, the worst kind of cold-related illness is hypothermia. What hypothermia is basically when your core body temperature begins to drop below 95 degrees. You can have the signs of hypothermia fairly easily and not even know it. You start getting confused if you're outside. You're uncontrollably shivering, but then you stop shivering. Difficulty speaking, you get kind of confused in your words. Maybe you're getting really tired, or maybe those arms and those legs and those feet aren't moving as well. That abnormally low body temperature can occur. It doesn't have to occur in extreme cold. You can have hypothermia with temperatures above 40 degrees. All it takes is a prolonged exposure to usually wet, cold, or wet conditions, say from working outside in cold weather, say you're stuck in the rain in extremely cold temperatures, or you're spending too much time outdoors. What you want to do with hypothermia, seek medical attention right away. Hypothermia isn't something to mess around with. It can lead to life-threatening conditions. So after the storm, measuring and reporting, very important on a day like today. We'll go through a little bit of this. The number one thing in this part of the country is it's difficult to measure snow, and a lot of that has to deal with the constant amount of wind that we have in the plains during winter. So these 5 guidelines here, what you want to do is try to find a flat, unsheltered area. You're going to want to stay away from buildings. Why do we stay away from buildings? It's because buildings usually cause a collection of extra snow along them from currents from any wind that's available. Try to avoid elevated surfaces at times. Again, we're looking at that current of the wind, the upwelling of snow along a rooftop or along a deck can lead to enhanced snowfall amounts. Use a flat area. Try to find a flat area if possible. A snowboard is great. All you have to do, put a piece of plywood out there, paint it white so it reflects the sunlight, doesn't absorb any heat. Use that as your snowboard or your measuring area. Ruler or yardstick, pretty straightforward, what you can measure snow with. Make sure your ruler is perpendicular to the ground. Try to read that measurement at eye level. Take multiple readings. We see a lot of folks who just measure once and say, oh, that's my snowfall. Well, that snowfall can be affected by a lot of things in your backyard. Like we've talked, trees, homes, fences, patios can all affect snowfall readings. Even any current of wind can affect that snowfall. Take multiple readings, add those all together and average those out for your snowfall. Finally, report your measurements. So where should I measure? We talked a little bit about this. Find an open area away from obstructions, trees, buildings, anything that's an obstruction to the wind or could cause some enhancement by the localized wind currents around you. Ideally, if you're trying to measure, if you have a house, you'll want to measure at least 2 times the height of your house. So if your home is 25 feet tall, you should try to find a place to measure that's at least 50 feet away. Same thing with trees. If you have a table next to a tree, probably not going to be an accurate spot. But if your measuring surface is well away from those surfaces, That's where you want to measure. Avoid drifts. It's hard to avoid drifts in this area. What a lot of times what you're going to do, again, we fall back onto the multiple measurements. Find multiple areas in your yard, add those measurements up, and divide by the amount of measurements you've taken for your total. Some common questions. Can I just measure from my deck and my patio? Sometimes. As we've seen in the cases of last night, the wind was fairly reasonable. Snow is fairly easy to measure in a light wind event. In this case, maybe your deck or your patio is okay, but a lot of times you're going to have inaccurate measurements because any upwelling, any change in direction from the wind is going to increase or decrease those amounts right next to your home. Can I measure on the grass? Well, we really want to avoid measuring on the grass because the most common pitfall of this is when you use your ruler, you're going to go down all the way to push down to that hard surface. Where's that hard surface? Usually 2 inches below where your snowfall, where your grass height was. So your snowfall is probably sitting right on the top of your grass, but you're measuring an extra amount of that grass height. Can I measure on concrete and blacktop? Again, sometimes. Why do we say sometimes? Well, what do these surfaces do? A lot of times before an event, they can hold temperatures higher, they can hold heat. Blacktop takes a little while to cool off when it comes to winter storms. So you can actually melt your snowfall when the snowfall is falling. And that leads to underreporting. Same thing with concrete. It can also happen with concrete. Now, if it's been extremely cold for many days and you know those ground temperatures and that pavement temperature is below freezing, this is probably an okay surface at this point. Will I always measure in the same location? Absolutely not. The way the winds work in this area, the way every storm brings in snowfall differently, you may be looking for multiple measurements in multiple different areas. Ice, let's talk a little bit of ice. We haven't had a ton of ice yet this winter season, but it's certainly possible. There's 2 different kinds of ice, one called flat ice, which is pretty much what it sounds like. Flat ice is just ice accumulation on a flat surface. We'll want to use a ruler in these cases. All you can do is put your ruler up against that surface and take a straight eye measurement, and then repeat on multiple flat surfaces and take an average of those ice accumulations. We can also get ice accumulations on round surfaces, and this is called radial ice accumulation. This happens on things like trees and shrubs, branches. What you want to do here, use your ruler, and I've got an example on the photo here, or on the image you're looking at. So in this example, when freezing rain falls on a surface, ice accumulates more so on the bottom of a branch than on the top of the branch, because that water follows gravity and it accumulates on the bottom. So what you're going to do, take your ruler, measure the ice accumulation on the top half of that branch, measure the ice accumulation on the bottom half of that branch, add those things together, and then divide by 2. And this comes up with your total ice accumulation for radial ice accumulation. One really helpful tool for all meteorologists and anyone with an interest in the weather world is something called MPing. It's an app that you can download to your phone if you have iOS or Android. It's on both of these. But what this does, it's an instant precipitation reporting mechanism. So if precipitation is falling in my area and I want to report to the National Weather Service or anyone who's monitoring winter weather what it is, I open up my app, it knows my location, or I can tell it my location. I can plug in if it's rain, freezing rain, drizzle, freezing drizzle. I hit submit, and that report instantly gets sent off to all the entities that monitor winter weather conditions. And it also gets put on handy maps like this MPing report map, which you can find on the MPing website. It's completely anonymous. There's no information tracking for it. And it's extremely helpful to those of us in the weather community when we're trying to follow what's happening with a winter storm in the area. How do you report precipitation? Well, we hopefully today, many of you have reported your snowfall totals. There's a couple different ways you can do it. One is a very, very nice and unique program called CocoRAS. I'd really encourage anyone who has an interest in weather observing, whether it's rainfall or snowfall, to sign up for CocoRAS in their area. All it is it's a network of observers across the country who submit their precipitation reports after precipitation has fallen. Usually these reports happen between 6 and 7 in the morning. But these reports all get pushed into our weather service systems here, and we can see them instantly. And it helps us really document what happens. There are other ways of making real-time weather reports, and I'm going to show you this website here in a minute that's on our webpage. That's really helpful to us. But you can also do these other things. You can email us, nws.siouxfalls@noaa.gov. That's a direct email into the National Weather Service office here. Social media is our wonderful tool that we use for both providing forecast information, but also collecting information. Last but not least, you can call the office. We have a public line since we're a public organization. You can call us with your weather reports. So a little bit more about that one-time reporting form on our website. If you go to our website, weather.gov/Sioux Falls, and look under the tab that says Current Hazards, you'll see a little option here that says Submit a Storm Report. Now, when you click on that, it'll provide a nice handy reporting setup that you can use here. You can report, in this example is snowfall, but you can report in the severe weather season. You can report things like hail, damage, wind damage, and those kind of things as well. What you do is select snowfall, hit next. It'll allow you to report what your snowfall total is, provide any details as far as that's concerned. You can put in your address if you want your address in there, or you can allow it to use your device's location, and it'll automatically detect where your location is based on your cell phone or your computer. And then when you hit that submit button, you could put in your name if you wanted to be contacted, or an email in that case. But when you hit the submit button, it pops up directly into our computer systems here at the National Weather Service. And then we can submit that storm report for everyone out there to know what the storm total snow was in your area. This is extremely helpful when it comes to communicating what's happened during the storm for our media partners out there, for example. If you're curious about a lot of the things that we've talked about today as we kind of wrap up here, we've created some very helpful guides that go over winter weather safety terms, what watches, warnings, and advisories were, some of those things you should do before a storm or after the storm, winter weather reporting conditions, how to measure snow, how to measure ice again, and then some ways to report on to us. You can find these resources that you can download at our website. It's a bit of a long link here, but there will be another code here you can scan in just a minute to take you there. If you don't have the ability to scan that code or scan that address, just head on over to our website, weather.gov/Sioux Falls, and look at the top news headlines. This class sign up, as well as the informational links that we have here, will be available at the top news of the day headline section. And with that, I'm going to throw in my contact information here. I really want to appreciate all of the information here, all of your attendance and all of your time here this morning. I know we've talked a lot about a lot of information. Again, my name is Matthew Dukes, and I'm a lead meteorologist here at the Sioux Falls office. Peter Rogers is our warning coordination meteorologist. Normally, we're providing these winter weather training sessions a couple times a year, just for helping people that are either trying to acclimate to the winter weather here in the area, maybe new to the area, or just want a refresher. You can always contact us by email. You can also contact us by phone directly to our office. If you're looking for a forecast, you can also get it on the phone at 605-330-4444. This will give you an automated phone call recording. And it'll also do one neat thing. If you're a snowplow contractor, or if you just need to know the snowfall at the Sioux Falls Airport during an event, call that 444 number, and you'll be able to get the hourly snowfall estimates here at the Sioux Falls office. With all that being said, I want to thank you for your time here. I'm seeing a couple questions in the chat. I just wanted to address one here. Can I use my CocoRa's gauge to get my snowfall total? You can do that gauge as long as you've taken out the the inserts, as long as you've, a lot of times before the winter season, you'll want to take out the funnel and then take out the inner tube of it, and then you can melt down the snowfall out there. Perhaps a better way, because sometimes these gauges won't catch all of the snowfall if there's been a lot of wind, you might want to do something called a snow core. If you go to the CoCoRaHS website, there'll be some training videos there on how to do a snow core of the snow in your area. Typically, all this is, though, is going out there, try to find a representative area where you've taken your snowfall measurements. Turn your large CoCoRaHS gauge over, insert it down into the snow, slide something underneath that to capture all that snow into that gauge, flip it in, flip it over, bring that inside, melt that snow down carefully, and then you can measure your snowfall or whatever the liquid was from your snowfall for that depth of snow and report that as your total depth, or total liquid precipitation. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing, but if you go to cocorahs.org, they'll have some training videos on their website for you there. Another question here, as far as weather apps and reliable forecast information. I can't really go into any specifics when it comes down to what apps are good or what apps are bad. There are a ton of winter weather apps out there. The only thing I can do, I guess the only thing I can suggest is making sure you're having multiple sources of weather information. Don't just solely rely on your weather app. I can't speak for how all of them are created or how reliable they are. But again, your best method here, make sure you're following the Weather Service forecast information. Make sure you're following your local media, whether that be radio or TV or news. They're relaying a lot of very accurate and very great information ahead of winter weather events. And again, don't just rely on the first forecast that you see ahead of a winter storm. Check back in. Forecasts change every hour practically. Our model data comes in every 6 hours, so we're constantly looking at new model data. Again, I think that's all for today. I want to appreciate your attendance. This session is going to be recorded, and we'll have posted this on our website here. It may be another week. If you've enjoyed this webinar today in this session, we're going to hopefully hold another one next Tuesday evening. There's some uncertainties on whether an incoming storm may kind of affect that one. But if you know of anyone who could benefit from this training, please refer them to this training and get them signed up for their class next week. Again, I appreciate the attendance today, and hopefully you have a great and warm and pleasant day. Have a great one.